I woke at 3 in the morning with my heart racing. The silence of the house was broken by a sound that didn't come from my dreams. A second, muffled voice echoed from the next room. It wasn't mine. It wasn't his. It was another presence. Strange. Too intimate to be just any noise. In that instant, I realized the word paranoia no longer defined me. I was right. I got out of bed slowly, feeling the cold floor chill my feet. Each step was a blow to the hope I still harbored for our marriage. The hallway seemed longer than ever, as if to protect me from the truth that was about to tear my life apart. But the sound kept coming, and my breathing began to labor, betraying my panic. It was impossible to deny what was happening inside my own home. For a second, I considered opening the door and ending it all right there. But the fear of confirmation overcame my courage. I returned to my room, my heart pounding in my chest, and simply sat on the edge of the bed. I knew that moment wasn't a late-night reverie. It was the first step toward revealing a carefully hidden betrayal. And from that moment on, nothing would be the same. I lay down again, but sleep no longer belonged to me. The house, which had always been a shelter, now seemed complicit in something I couldn't name. The bedroom ceiling, which had so often guarded my rest, became a canvas of bitter memories. I felt as if the walls were breathing with me, laden with silence and secrets. The clock glowed 3:07, as if a direct warning to my eyes. I gripped my phone tightly, trying to find air in my fingertips. I opened the notebook where I keep thoughts I don't have the courage to say. I wrote, I heard another voice in the room. I hesitated, erased it, and began writing again. For the first time, I recorded what my heart already knew. The memories invaded without asking permission, as if to torture me. I remembered Sundays that smelled of cake and laughter. I remembered the impromptu trips, the wind on the road, the promise to always return home. I remembered how he called me my peace. Now everything seemed like a false stage set to hide the farce. I got up for air, but the cold floor brought me back to the present. In the kitchen, I got a glass of water and stared at my reflection in the window. I saw a woman in her late 50s, scarred by life, but firm. I saw eyes that already knew more than they cared to admit. Maturity didn't save me from the pain, but it gave me the tools to bear it. I went to the living room and sat on the sofa, hugging the folded blanket that had so often witnessed our affection. Now it seemed like an abandoned play. I looked at every object, every photo, every detail. Everything carried a different weight, as if the furniture held a truth that eluded me. I closed the windows as if closing off one's own memories. The hallway seemed to beckon me back, as if it wanted to push me toward the bedroom door. I approached, touched the doorknob, but stepped back. This wasn't the time to open that scene. Not every catch requires urgency. Some require strategy. I returned to the office, determined to think before acting. The low light illuminated the laptop on the desk. I took a deep breath and logged into the account we used together for simple things. I opened the folders and noticed strange names, too banal to be true. Notes, meetings, trips, common words hiding secrets. I clicked on travel history, and my body froze. The routes didn't match the excuses. Wednesday, 10 p.m., an industrial neighborhood with no restaurants. Saturday, supposed game with friends. But the map showed another direction. Colored lines told the truth his mouth denied. My heart raced with each click. The lie was no longer just in my head. I remembered the coat smelling of sweet perfume that wasn't mine. The hastily ironed shirt, still damp, as if hiding a rush. The long showers at odd hours. The short smile when I asked, "Is everything okay?" And above all, the echoing phrase, "You're paranoid." But maturity held me by the hand. There was no point in confronting without concrete proof. I needed coherence, dates, times. I wouldn't be held hostage by screams or tears. I would be the author of a report, a story impossible to deny. Coldness began to cover my body like a new skin. I opened my health insurance app to check trivial details. On my statement, I saw a reimbursement for physical therapy at 10:10 p.m. Who does physical therapy during motel hours? My stomach turned to stone. Every detail pushed me deeper toward the truth. And yet, I wrote it down calmly. I looked at the wall and saw the photo from our anniversary. Me, in a blue dress, 49 years old, smiling like someone who believes in love. Him, with a crooked tie, kissing my hair. The frame seemed to mock my naivete. I closed my eyes to keep the longing from paralyzing me, and I went back to the computer. I grabbed the spare car key from the living room drawer. I turned on the tracker he'd never been able to deactivate. The map lit up, revealing the places he'd visited. An address repeated itself night after night. The pattern began to unfold before me, line after line. On the tracker's dashboard, I saw cold details. Departure, 9:38 p.m., return 12:12 a.m., industrial neighborhood. Always the same place, always the same time. It was the same address he called a team meeting. No team works surrounded by neon lights and sweet perfume. I wrote everything down like an investigator. The memory of the gym pierced me like a knife. He always said it was packed, that he'd come home exhausted. But often he'd come home dry, smelling good, as if he'd just put on an act. A bag of clean clothes on the car seat was the missing detail. His body didn't carry the sweat of truth. I went to the guest room, where we stored old boxes. Inside, I found a letter written on our 5th wedding anniversary. "I choose you every day," he wrote. I ran my finger over the faded ink. It hurt more than any digital proof. The contrast between promise and lie was cruel. I grabbed my black notebook and wrote, "Lucidity Protocol. Item 1, don't confront without proof. Item 2, observe patterns for 7 days. Item 3, store evidence away from home. It was my emotional survival manual. There, I was in control of the pain. I backed up all the files to an alternate email address. I created a hidden, password-protected folder. I renamed the documents with codes only I would understand. I transformed the burden into strategy, the anguish into organization. It was my way of not letting anyone call me crazy again. In the hallway mirror, I practiced my neutral face. The woman who knows but won't say. The one who observes without trembling. The one who turns tears into blades. I learned to swallow expressions, to freeze gazes. Silence would be my most powerful weapon. When his room creaked, I froze in the middle of the house. The sound of the bed was a warning, but it wasn't meant for me. I ran to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, pretending to get something. The motor became my curtain of noise. I was an actress on the stage of my own life. The next morning, the smell of coffee invaded the kitchen. He kissed me on the forehead and asked how I slept. I smiled and said, "I slept well." I swallowed the lie like someone swallowing bitter medicine. Normality was just a poorly rehearsed fantasy. I sat at the table and watched his hands. Always steady, now restless. His eyes darted away from mine, as if my presence were a minefield. The silence between us screamed louder than any argument, and I learned to listen without asking. That afternoon, I stopped by the gym where he claimed to work out. I asked for a trial class and heard the receptionist say, "Your husband canceled 2 months ago." Twice in a row, I felt the ground slip from under my feet. 2 months of made-up stories, 2 seasons of lies. His theater had an audience, but no stage. In the parking lot, I leaned against the steering wheel to breathe. The city chugged on, indifferent to my despair. I gripped the steering wheel like someone holding on to their life. Inside me, everything screamed silently. But I returned home with a calm face. At home, I found a triple-folded receipt in the drawer. Cash payment, Suite 12, period. It was simple proof, but definitive. I kept the paper along with the directions and photos. There was no more room for excuses. The truth had a signature. That night, his cell phone lit up on the table. The preview showed, "Did you arrive safely?" He turned the device face down. He smiled and asked, "How was your day?" Mine was a school of courage. He had no idea. I grabbed a book to disguise it, but he heard everything. The vibrating tone was different, familiar. It was someone constant, not fleeting. A voice fixed in the silence of the phone, and my certainty grew even stronger. He said he needed to attend to an urgent email. He entered the office and closed the door. I waited in silence, counting to 100. I got up slowly, my woolen feet on the cold floor. I went to the door and listened. His voice spoke softly. "I can't do it today, she's at home." Silence, held breath. "I'll explain tomorrow. Same time." The wood of the door carried the weight of betrayal. I braced myself to keep from collapsing. I returned to the living room and lay down on the sofa. The ceiling swirled like a raging sea. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I turned each tear into a strategy. The pain wouldn't be wasted. What I didn't yet know was that the next message would turn everything upside down. A simple yet devastating detail, a name I knew without ever having seen. The final piece of evidence that would turn suspicion into a sentence. And from then on, there would be no turning back. That night seemed endless. I shifted on the sofa, my body tired but my mind buzzing. The silence of the house was merely the cover of a pulsating secret. Every detail I observed returned like a cruel echo. I was inside a labyrinth of lies, and the walls grew narrower. The next morning, I woke before my alarm. The sun was timidly streaming through the curtains, but my chest was heavy. I got up quietly, like someone carrying dynamite inside. I made coffee, set the table, and left everything in its place. On the outside, routine. On the inside, a storm. He came downstairs with shuffling steps, but with the same rehearsed smile. He sat at the table, picked up his cell phone, and turned it face down, as always. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice too sweet to be real. I replied, "Yes," like a stone. Inside me, the ice spread. As he talked about work, I watched his eyes. They no longer shone at me, but at another screen, another life. Every sentence he said seemed rehearsed, copied from days past. I smiled and nodded, playing my part. The actress inside me was sharp. When he left the house, I stood still. The sound of the car's engine pulling away was both a relief and a torture. I opened the window, took a deep breath, and felt the momentary freedom. It was when he left that I could be true. And my truth was hard as concrete. I ran to the office and turned on my laptop. I searched through the archives, the emails, every digital shadow, until I found it. An archived message, lost among meeting notes. "Yesterday was perfect. Thank you for making me feel alive." My heart pounded in panic. The name signing that message wasn't unfamiliar. It was someone I'd seen at company parties, at formal dinners. A woman who smiled politely, but always with eyes too quick for my husband. My body shivered. The mask was beginning to take on a face. I closed the laptop, but my hands were shaking. I paced the room in circles, trying to organize my thoughts. I felt anger, disgust, but also a strange clarity. Now I had a name, a signature, a thread. It was time to pull until the fabric ripped. I grabbed my phone and opened social media. I discreetly searched, scouring every photo, every comment. She was always there, liking, praising, at suspicious times. It was like a shadow that loomed large but never truly hid. Now, she was the protagonist of my investigation. I found photos of her in places he claimed to be. Restaurants, luxury hotels, company events. Always on the same day, at the same time. It was impossible not to connect the dots. I was no longer dealing with assumptions, but with a staged choreography. And I was the only one seeing the whole scene. My stomach churned, but I didn't shed tears. I washed my face, tied my hair back, and stared at myself in the mirror. "You're not going to fall apart now," I whispered to myself. The pain strengthened me. The lie fueled me with raw energy. I was about to become a hunter. That night, when he returned, I was ready. I casually asked about his day, as if nothing had changed. He smiled, told a predictable version, and I just listened. But my gaze hung heavy on every word. He didn't know it, but he was already being judged in silence. I let dinner go by with apparent normality. The wine in my glass reflected my cold face. Each sip was a pact with myself. Wait, observe, record. Strategy was my only weapon, and I wouldn't give anything away prematurely. When he went to sleep, I stayed awake. I carefully picked up his phone and saw the screen locked with a new password. I smiled to myself, bitterly. The change was the missing proof. He knew he was hiding something big. But every barrier he created made me stronger. In the silence, I took out my diary and wrote. I noted hours, speeches, gestures. I described how sweat dripped down his forehead when I asked too few questions, how he averted his eyes, how he changed the subject. Details only a mature woman can notice. And I was collecting weapons. The following days were a repeated theater. He left with excuses, returned with smiles, and I observed him like a scientist. His every movement was a piece of data, every absence a note. And I accumulated invisible evidence while outwardly feigning ignorance. Until one night, fate presented me with a gift. He'd left his phone charging in the living room, vibrating. I was 2 meters away when the screen lit up. A short message. "I'm already in my room, waiting for you." The world stopped, but my body acted quickly. I grabbed the phone and took a picture of the screen with my phone. My heart was racing like a war drum. I calmly put everything away, took a deep breath. I put his phone back exactly as it was. He never knew that in that instant, his mask had slipped. I returned to the bedroom and lay down beside him. His light snoring was an insult, an orchestra of contempt. I closed my eyes, but my mind exploded with plans. I no longer wanted just proof. I wanted the complete downfall, the downfall that would sweep every lie out. I knew that message was just the tip of the iceberg, and that soon photos, encounters, revelations would come. I needed to be ready for the final blow. Because when the house of cards collapsed, there would be no rebuilding. What was to come would be definitive. The next morning, the coffee seemed more bitter than ever. He sat at the table with the same worn smile, as if life were just routine. I watched him stir the sugar in his cup, distracted, oblivious to the fact that I was already carrying invisible weapons against him. My heart was pounding, but my face remained serene. The best revenge is always the silence before the explosion. As he talked about work commitments, my memories punished me. The first trip, the first apartment, the birthdays celebrated with joy. Each scene was now a scratched film, a burned tape. There was no returning to innocence. What I had seen and heard could no longer be erased. That day, I decided to follow him. I got in the car half an hour after he left. The traffic seemed complicit in my anxiety. Every red light was torture. I kept my distance like in a spy movie, eyes trained on the rearview mirror. At every turn, my breathing quickened. I wasn't just a wife, I was an investigator. He parked in front of a discreet hotel with no flashy signs. He stayed in the car for a few seconds, straightening his shirt, spraying on perfume. Then he got in like someone who already knew the way. My chest tightened, but my hands were steady as I noted the exact time. His theater had a stage, and I was a hidden audience. I waited in the car, my hands cold on the steering wheel. Time seemed to drag by the minutes like a punishment. Each person who entered or left the hotel made me hold my breath. After almost 2 hours, he emerged. He smiled to himself, as if carrying a sweet secret on his lips. My entire body trembled with pent-up rage. I went home before him, making sure he didn't suspect anything. I tidied the living room, lit a candle, and made dinner. When he arrived, he found the same attentive wife as always. I kissed her on the cheek and asked how her day had been. He lied without hesitation, and I smiled as if I believed him. But inside, fury grew. In the early hours of the morning, I couldn't sleep. I grabbed my diary and wrote down every detail: departure time, hotel, length of stay, expression upon his return. The page was filled with invisible but real evidence. I felt like I was building my own courtroom. And in that courtroom, he would be both defendant and witness. The following days repeated the same pattern. Always an excuse, always an absence. I followed, observed, took notes. The hotels changed, the schedules varied, but the essence was the same. He lived 2 lives, and I moved between them like a ghost. Each entry brought me closer to the final sentence. I began to notice even more subtle signs. The longer ringtone for certain messages, the smile that slipped away when he responded quickly, the change in tone of voice when speaking on the phone. He didn't realize it, but I could already read his secret language. No mask lasts forever. One night, I pretended to sleep while he changed his clothes. The intense perfume betrayed that he wasn't coming from home. He applied lotion to his hands, looked in the mirror, and took a deep breath. I watched him through a crack, unnoticed. There, I noticed he was getting ready for me, but thinking about her. At work, I discovered he had blocked my access to some company events. Meetings where I had previously been welcome were now omitted. I understood. She was there. They were creating a parallel world where I was merely an obstacle, and this fueled my determination to tear off both their masks. One rainy afternoon, I saw his car parked near the same hotel. This time, I got out and walked to the reception. The attendant glanced at me for a second and looked away, embarrassed. I ordered a coffee at the cafe next door and waited. I wanted to see them together. I wanted living proof. Fate seemed to conspire with me. Minutes later, I saw her walk in. An easy smile, sparkling eyes, quick heels. I recognized her immediately, the woman from the company parties. I saw her hand touch his before they entered the elevator. It was like an invisible knife piercing my chest. But I didn't look away, because it was what I needed to see. I returned home drenched from the rain, but with my soul on fire. I etched every detail of the scene into my memory. Her coat, his gesture, the elevator that swallowed them. I was no longer just a victim, I was an eyewitness to the farce. And that changed everything. The pain became ammunition. That night, when he arrived, I wiped my tears and sat at the table. He told a trivial lie, a meeting that went on for too long. I simply nodded with a smile, my heart pounding. The serenity on my face was the perfect disguise. With each lie, I accumulated power. In the shower, I cried silently, the hot water washing my face. But it wasn't weakness, it was catharsis. It was fuel. I looked in the mirror and saw not a broken woman, but a warrior in the making. The pain polished me and I was no longer afraid. The fear was now his. I began planning my confrontation, but with surgical precision. I didn't want to just reveal, I wanted to disarm. I wanted his every word to be suffocated by its own contradictions. I wanted all who believed in his perfect image to see what I saw. Justice would come not just from me, but from the world he deceived. While he slept, I opened the computer again. I saved screenshots, photos, schedules. I uploaded everything to a secure account. There was no turning back. I wasn't just fighting betrayal, but the erasure of my own dignity. And I wouldn't let that happen. Lying down, I stared at the dark, silent ceiling. His every breath beside me was an insult. Every movement was a reminder of the double life he cultivated. But I wasn't alone. My pain was now an army, my silence a sword. His downfall was already written, and I didn't know it yet, but the next test wouldn't come from me. It would come from a detail so small, so banal, that it would change everything. Something that would slip through his fingers without him realizing it. Something I couldn't deny, not even in front of the world. And it would be in this detail that everything would fall apart. The day began like so many others. He got up early, took a quick shower, and left the house in a hurry. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the still full coffee cup. His every gesture was a rehearsed script, but I already knew every scene by heart. My heart pounded, but my mind was already in war mode. There was no more room for naivete. As he walked away, I opened the computer with steady hands. I double-checked the backups, the folders, the records. Everything was safe, every detail stored in duplicate. It was like putting together a cruel puzzle, but each piece fit perfectly. And the final image was devastating. At work, I received an anonymous message. "You deserve to know the truth," it said. My eyes burned as I read, breathless. The message contained a link, and for a moment I hesitated to click. But curiosity and desperation overcame fear. What I saw, I would never forget. They were photos. He and she, together in a restaurant where we used to celebrate our birthdays. Sitting at the same table where he'd once held my hand. The images were clear, sharp, undeniable. He laughed. She looked at him as if he owned the world. My stomach turned to stone. I gripped my phone so tightly my hands ached. The photos seemed to pierce me like sharp knives. It was no longer a suspicion, it was reality printed in pixels. The betrayal wasn't just happening, it was being celebrated in public. I felt my entire body shiver. I returned home early, without him knowing. The loneliness of the walls seemed to swallow me. I walked from one room to another, seeking strength in the space we'd built together. I touched the frame of an old photo and nearly collapsed. How could everything so quickly turn into a lie? That night, when he walked through the door, I tried to hold my breath. I watched his gestures, his words, his false affection. It was like watching an actor recite lines in a decadent play. Every detail was predictable, every smile rehearsed. But inside me, a volcano of anger was growing. I sat on the couch and left the television on mute. He settled in beside me, as if nothing had changed. I pretended to watch, but every muscle in my body vibrated with tension. The scent of a woman's perfume that wasn't mine permeated the air, and I swallowed every second like poison. In the early hours of the morning, I waited for him to fall asleep before checking my phone. I discovered he'd changed the password again, but he'd forgotten to turn off notifications on the screen. I saw messages flashing, hearts, intimate words, promises. Each notification was a punch to my chest, but it was also a silent victory. I took a picture of the screen with my phone, capturing every detail. I knew it would come in handy at the right moment. I went back to bed, lay down next to him, and closed my eyes. His calm breathing seemed to mock me. But I had already decided, soon, the mask would fall. The following days were calculated torture. He made excuses, left in a hurry, returned late. And I continued collecting evidence, logging schedules, saving tracks. With each lie, I grew colder. With each detail, more prepared. The game was no longer his, it was mine. At the office, I began observing his coworkers. I noticed how some avoided my eyes, as if they knew too much. The sidelong glances, the awkward silences. The betrayal was no longer just private. It was public. I was the last to be spared the truth. A friend approached discreetly in the hallway. "You need to open your eyes," she said quietly. I didn't need to ask what she meant. Her gaze said it all. I felt a wave of heat rise through my body. The web of lies was unraveling at the edges. At home, the atmosphere grew heavier. He tried to act normal, but tension was in the air. The silence between us grew thicker with each passing day. I no longer needed to ask. The answers were written in their gestures. With each averted glance, the truth screamed. I began to dream of the confrontation. I imagined his expressions, his apologies, his pauses. I thought about every word I would say, every piece of evidence I would show. The moment was approaching, and I wanted it to be final, with no chance of turning back. Meanwhile, I continued to watch. He was leaving once again for a supposed meeting. I followed his car, keeping my distance. My heart pounded in time with the chase. I watched him park at the hotel again. This time, I decided not to wait in the car. I walked to the door with firm steps. The receptionist looked at me with frightened eyes, as if she recognized me. I didn't say a word. I just waited, motionless, like a shadow. When he walked in minutes later, accompanied by her, time stood still. I saw their hands touch, saw their eyes shine, and the world fell silent. My body froze, but my eyes registered every detail. That scene needed no subtitles. It was living proof, the absolute catch. They disappeared into the elevator, and I remained motionless. Inside, something shattered completely. There was no longer room for doubt. I returned home, feeling the ground beneath me. The steering wheel felt heavy, the road endless. But within me, a certainty grew. The game was over. He didn't know it, but he was already defeated. Because nothing could erase what I had seen with my own eyes. And deep down, I knew. The next time wouldn't be just observation. It would be the time of shock, of impact, of confrontation. The moment when silence would cease to be a weapon and become an explosion. The moment when I would return every lie with the force of naked truth. I woke with a heavy heart, as if I had run a marathon in the silence of the night. The scene at the hotel still burned in my eyes, every detail etched into my skin like a scar. He snored beside me, oblivious to the weight of what he was hiding. The irony was unbearable. He slept peacefully while I bore the storm. The betrayal had a body, a face, an address. I got up slowly, took a cold shower, and let the water run over me as if it could wash away the pain. I looked in the mirror and didn't see a victim. I saw a woman in metamorphosis. My wrinkles weren't signs of weakness. They were medals of experience. Maturity gave me the strength to face what was to come. And I was no longer afraid. At breakfast, I set the table as usual. I put out fruit, bread, and fresh coffee. He came down smiling with the false routine rehearsed. He talked about work, laughed at something on his phone, feigned normality. I watched him silently, every gesture a staged lie. As he spoke, I remembered the previous day. The touch of her hands on his, the knowing glint in her eyes. It was like watching a lewd play, one I'd never been invited to. My stomach churned, but my face remained calm. The war was now internal. He hurried out of the house, and I stood at the window watching. The car disappeared around the corner, taking with it the mask of the perfect husband. I took a deep breath, clasped my hands, and went back inside. The room seemed suffocating, every object impregnated with memories. The home had transformed into a theater set. I grabbed my phone and opened the photos again. I relived the impact as if for the first time. He was laughing. She was looking at him with devotion. I, silent, was the shadow they ignored. But now that shadow was armed with proof. His downfall was inevitable. That day, I decided to speak to someone I trusted. I called my sister, my voice low, my heart racing. I told her part of the truth without revealing everything. On the other end of the line, silence filled with pain. "I already suspected," she said, tears in her voice. I felt a coldness slice through my skin. I hung up the phone and cried alone in the kitchen. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the fact that others had already realized it before I did. How many had looked at me with pity? How many knew but kept quiet so as not to hurt me? The humiliation burned more than the anger. I decided to leave the house to breathe. I walked the streets aimlessly, lost in thought. The people around me seemed to live normal lives, unaware of the earthquake inside me. I noticed couples holding hands, families laughing together, and I felt a deep emptiness, as if I had lost an entire life. On the way, I passed in front of the restaurant in the photos. The memories hit me like a punch in the stomach. There one day I was happy. There one day, he looked at me with the same smile he now offered the other. The betrayal wasn't just against me, it was against our entire history. I returned home determined. I opened the notebook and organized all the tests in a single folder. Photos, messages, routes, receipts. Each item was a brick in the wall that would surround it. I wouldn't throw it into the wind, I would build a clear shot. And when it came, it would be irreversible. In the evening, he returned earlier than usual. He carried flowers in his hand, as if trying to make up for an absence. The smell invaded the room, but it didn't bring comfort. He handed me the bouquet with a kiss on the forehead. I smiled out of reflex, but inside, I swallowed the poison. As he talked about plans for the weekend, my mind raced. The images of the hotel, of the other woman, of his smile. The flowers in my hand seemed to mock my pain. I thought about throwing them away, but decided to keep them. They would be a symbol of farce, a souvenir of the theater. I lay down that night with my head boiling. His snoring seemed louder than ever. Every sound reminded me that I was sharing a bed with a stranger. I turned to the side and hugged the pillow, as if seeking refuge. The tears came silently, but not from weakness. They were goodbye tears. The next day, I woke up before him and put on my best clothes. It wasn't vanity, it was armor. I put on red lipstick, held my head up high, and left the house with a sense of purpose. I needed to face the world before I faced him. I needed to regain my strength by looking beyond the walls. I met a friend at the cafe and shared part of the story. She listened to me in silence, eyes wide. When I finished, he held my hand firmly. "You deserve better," he said. That simple sentence sounded like a hammer breaking chains. For the first time in days, I felt hope. I returned home with a different sparkle in my eyes. He noticed, but didn't comment. "Maybe you smelled the change. Maybe you noticed the strength in my eyes." He pretended to be normal, as always, but I knew. The wall of lies was beginning to crumble. The terrain was no longer safe for him. That night, I decided to test their reactions. I asked simple questions, but with hidden traps. He contradicted himself twice in less than 10 minutes. With each stumble, I made a mental note. The mask no longer fit well on the face. He didn't realize it, but he was giving himself away. I fell asleep with a new weight, but also with clarity. There was no more doubt, no more room for excuses. The betrayal was not just suspected, it was an indisputable fact, and I carried within me the flame of revelation. The next step wouldn't just be observing, it would be acting. I knew the opportunity would come soon. An unexpected detail, a minor flaw, an oversight on his part. Something I wouldn't have to look for. It would come to me. And when it arrived, I would be ready to light the fuse that would set everything on fire. His world would never be the same again. The morning started out strangely calm. He went down to the cafe with his cell phone glued to his hand, laughing to himself about something he didn't share with me. I watched him like someone watching an animal trapped in a gilded cage. His every gesture was calculated, but the rush in his fingers betrayed nervousness. I felt like something big was about to happen. While he was talking about meetings, I noticed something. The cell phone screen flashed notifications, and a name repeated itself. It wasn't hers, but a disguised contact. Carlos, work. His smile didn't match his supposed colleagues. It was the new cover for his betrayal. As soon as he left, I ran to my computer. I researched the number on consultation websites and social networks. The result was a shock. The number was linked to the lover's WhatsApp. My heart sank, but I also smiled with relief. He was tripping over his own tricks. With each discovery, anger was mixed with a strange pride. I had become something I never thought I would be, a spy within my own marriage. My maturity gave me patience, but also strategy, and I was getting closer and closer to the final blow. I decided to take the next step. I discreetly installed a call recording app on my spare cell phone. I set it to pick up calls when I was close to him. It was risky, but I had already crossed the line of return. I needed to hear the truth with my own ears. On the same day, fate rewarded me. He received a call while he was in his home office. I hid behind the door, heart pounding. Her voice echoed clear, sweet, intimate. "I miss it already," she said. I closed my eyes and held my breath. He laughed softly, that laugh that was once mine alone. "We'll see you soon," he replied. The recording captured everything, every word like a knife turning in the wound. I clutched the cell phone in my hands, knowing I had just recorded the definitive proof. The lump in my throat turned to stone. After he hung up, he left the office calmly, as if nothing had happened. He asked if I wanted to go out for dinner. I smiled calmly, hiding the storm inside me. He had no idea that I already carried the sentence of his lie in my pocket, and it gave me a strange feeling of power. That night, dinner was silent. I chewed slowly, but my mind was buzzing. He talked about projects, about clients, about banalities. I just watched him, committing every movement to memory. Everything about him now seemed like an act, and I no longer saw the man I loved. Lying in bed, I listened to his every breath as if it were an insult. I thought about waking him up, throwing the evidence in his face. But I held back. Revenge needed a stage. It needed an audience. I wish his downfall was as public as his charade. And so, I remained silent. The following days became an internal battlefield. I collected evidence, but also emotions. The anger, the disgust, the coldness. My sister called me every day to see how I was doing. I responded in a calm voice, but inside me a trapped scream grew. The scream that would soon explode. On Friday, I found out he was away for work. I got in the car and followed the route using the tracker. With every kilometer, my heart beat faster. He parked in a neighboring town in front of a luxury hotel. I pulled into the parking lot and watched from a distance. He got out of the car smiling, talking on his cell phone. I waited for almost an hour until she arrived. A red dress, high heels, loose hair. He hugged her without hesitation, without fear, without guilt. He kissed her mouth as if he owned the world. I watched the scene motionless, like a hidden camera. It was the final show, and I was in the front row. The scene burned my eyes, but it also gave me strength. I photographed everything discreetly, capturing the kiss, the hug, the smile. Each click was a bullet loaded into the drum. I knew those images would be fatal when revealed. It was the end of the farce, and he had no idea. I returned home in silence, but inside I was exploding. I sat on the couch, took a deep breath, and reviewed the photos. My hands were shaking, but my heart was steady. I was no longer a hostage to silence. Now I was the owner of the truth. And the truth was about to crush him. That night he came home late, smelling like a hotel and cheap perfume. He hugged me as always, trying to pretend normality. I hugged him back, but with a smile that he couldn't decipher. I was too calm, too cold. The calm before the hurricane. I lay down next to him, but I didn't sleep. I spent hours planning every detail of the confrontation. Who would be present, where it would happen, how I would reveal the evidence. I didn't just want to hurt him. I wanted to dismantle his mask in front of everyone. I wanted the world to see what I saw. On Saturday, I called my sister and told her everything. I sent the photos, the audios, the prints. She cried on the phone, but her voice was steady. "He doesn't deserve the silence you carry," he said. His words echoed in me like a call. I knew the time was coming. I spent the next day preparing everything. I organized the tests into folders, saved them on pen drives, printed copies. Nothing could be erased or denied. It was my arsenal, and I was ready to use it. For the first time in a long time, I felt control. The control he tried to steal from me. And when Sunday arrived, with him bringing the same fake smile, I no longer trembled. I just watched him silently, putting away my invisible weapons. He didn't know it, but every word spoken that morning would be his last unpunished lie. The stage was set, and the curtain was about to open. What I didn't yet know was that, at the moment of confrontation, something would happen that would change everything. Something I hadn't anticipated. An unexpected piece that would come from outside. And this detail would transform not only his fall, but also the direction of my own life. Sunday dawned heavy, as if the air in the house carried secrets. He came down with a new shirt, the smell of strong cologne, and a practiced smile. He sat at the table and talked about banal plans, as if the world wasn't about to fall apart. I listened to him in silence, eyes fixed on every detail. The theater continued, but I already had the script for the end. While he was talking about barbecue with friends, my cell phone vibrated discreetly. A notification froze me. An email with no identified sender. The topic was straightforward. "You need to see this." I hesitated for a second, but opened it. The contents made my entire body shudder. They were recent photos of him and his lover, taken by someone else. The images showed places I didn't know yet. A different hotel, a remote restaurant, even the company. It was as if someone was helping me, providing evidence that I would never be able to obtain on my own. Who was behind this? I didn't know, but the truth came to me effortlessly. And that was even scarier. I got up from the table with the excuse of getting more coffee. On the way, my heart felt like a drum. I opened the cell phone gallery and enlarged the images. In one of them, he kissed his lover in the company's parking lot. This wasn't just intimate betrayal, it was a scandal ready to explode. The fall would be devastating. I returned to the table, pretending to be serene, but the blood was burning in my veins. He looked at me and asked, "Is everything okay?" I replied with a brief smile, "Perfectly." Inside, he screamed with indignation. Every lie he repeated in front of me became combustible. I no longer had room for doubts. After lunch, he said he needed to leave quickly. He invented the usual excuse: work stuff. I just nodded, cold, but with eyes that registered everything. I waited for him to leave and closed the door firmly. The house seemed to sigh along with me, as if it understood the weight I was carrying. I ran to the guest room and spread all the evidence on the bed. Printed photos, receipts, prints, recordings. Now there were also images of the anonymous email. It was an entire arsenal, ready to explode. I spent hours organizing them in chronological order, each piece connected to the puzzle of the lie. When I finished, I sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. For the first time, I realized it wasn't just me against him. There was someone out there who also wanted his mask destroyed. Someone who perhaps knew even more than I did. And this invisible presence intrigued me. Who else was in this story? In the evening, he came back tired, sweaty, but still trying to play the perfect husband. I sat next to him on the couch and watched his every move. The smell of her perfume still permeated his clothes. I closed my eyes and counted to 10, so I wouldn't explode right there. But I saved my anger for the right moment. I lay down next to him, but I stayed awake for hours. He looked at the dark ceiling, planning every detail of the confrontation. It wouldn't just be between four walls. I wanted there to be an audience, for there to be witnesses. He would not fall silent. His downfall would be public as his charade. The next day, I met my sister and showed her the new photos. She was in shock, teary-eyed but firm. "He's not going to escape," he said in a firm voice. I nodded silently, holding his hand. Her strength gave me even more courage. I was no longer alone in this war. I decided to look for a trustworthy lawyer. I took the evidence, explained everything, took a deep breath as I spoke. He listened to me in silence, looking at every detail carefully. When I finished, I just said, "You have everything you need to take him down." My body shook, but not from fear. It was the taste of victory approaching. I returned home with the folders stored in a bag. He was in the living room watching television as if he were an ordinary man. He looked at me, smiled, asked about my day. I said it was peaceful, and walked to the room. If he had known what I was carrying, he wouldn't have been able to breathe. In the early hours of the morning, I got up and went to the office. I opened the anonymous email again and analyzed every detail. I noticed that some photos were taken too close up. This meant that whoever sent it knew both of them well. Maybe it was someone from the company, someone close. The conspiracy was bigger than I imagined. I went back to bed with my mind in turmoil. I looked at him sleeping and felt a mixture of anger and contempt. How could I go to bed peacefully, knowing what I was doing? How could I pretend so much for so long? The mask was glued to my face, but I already had my hands ready to rip it off. The next morning, I decided to test its limits. I asked about the company, mentioned a random employee name. He paused for a second, then laughed nervously and changed the subject. My heart vibrated with satisfaction. It was proof that the network of lies was no longer under control. He was starting to trip over himself. I spent the rest of the day putting together an exhibition strategy. Who would be present? How would I show each piece of evidence? He didn't just want to scream. He wanted to dismount with surgical precision. Every photo, every audio, every receipt, in perfect order. I would disarm him in front of everyone, with no chance of escape. In the evening, I prepared dinner and sat down in front of it. I watched his mouth talking about trivialities while inside me the war raged. I smiled silently, thinking about the impact that was to come. He believed he was safe, but he was already walking on a knife's edge. And soon he would feel the cut. I closed my eyes before going to sleep and visualized the scene. The evidence on the table, the shocked expressions, his awkward silence. It was a show that I would direct myself. There was no turning back. I was ready to pull back the curtain. And it was exactly at that moment, at the height of my planning, that I received an unexpected call. On the other end of the line, a female voice, firm, almost desperate. "I need to talk to you about him," he said. My body froze. Who was she? What did you know? And what was he about to reveal to me? The call echoed in my ears like thunder. The voice was firm, but carried urgency. "You don't know me, but I know what he does." I felt my entire body go cold, as if someone had invaded my life through the front door. The silence in the room was broken only by the rapid beat of my heart. I took a deep breath and asked who it was. On the other hand, hesitation. Then, the revelation. She was an employee of his company. She had witnessed meetings, whispers, hidden hugs. "I can't stand seeing you being deceived anymore," he said. My hands shook, but a strange feeling of relief washed over me. She said she wasn't the only one who knew. What comments were circulated in the corridors? What complicit glances revealed secrets? The betrayal was no longer just intimate. It was public, talked about, almost mocked. I, the last to know, was also the one who suffered the most. The poison circulated in front of everyone. I asked him to send me what he had. Minutes later, my cell phone vibrated with new files. Videos of meetings when leaving the company, messages exchanged at meetings, even records at corporate parties. Each test was a blow, but also a weapon. The conspiracy was opening before me. I watched the videos in silence, eyes teary. He smiled, hugged, kissed in public. The woman he said was just a colleague became an open lover in front of the camera. My chest hurt, but my eyes were dry. The pain had given way to silent fury. That night, I walked through the house as if it were a battlefield. I touched every object, every photo, every memory. It was all part of a life that no longer existed. The woman who once believed in promises had died there, and in his place, someone unbreakable was born. The next day, I stared at him at breakfast like never before. I noticed his soft speech, his automatic smile, the way he avoided my eyes. His every gesture was proof that there was no turning back. I no longer saw a husband, I only saw a character. And that character would soon have the end written. During lunch, he talked about travel plans. "We both need to relax," he said. The cynicism made me want to laugh out loud. He planned vacations while collecting lovers and lies. I nodded calmly, but inside I was already planning the final scene. The journey to come would not be one of rest, but of ruin. In the afternoon, I met my sister again. I showed the new evidence, told them about the connection. His eyes watered, but there was pride in his eyes. "You're ready," she said, squeezing my hand. Ready not just to expose, but to liberate. His words echoed like a hammer on iron. In the evening, he arrived with a bottle of wine. He tried to create a climate. He tried to touch my shoulder. I turned away gently, smiling coldly. He didn't notice. He just thought I was tired. Little did he know that my tiredness had turned into armor, and that every smile of mine was a rehearsal for the revelation. In the silence of the early morning, I returned to the office. I spread all the evidence on the table, in order. Photos, audios, videos, receipts. It was a chronology of lies, impossible to deny. I looked at that arsenal and felt power pulsing through my veins. It was more than justice. It was liberation. I started writing a letter. Not for him, but for me. A farewell to the woman I was. A manifesto of the woman I became. Line by line, I put my pain and my strength on paper. When I finished, I cried in silence, but this time, tears of victory. The next day brought more clues. He left his laptop open in the room, trusting my silence too much. I opened it without hesitation and found emails exchanged with the lover. Sweet words, promises of the future, even conversations about me. "She'll never find out," he wrote. I smiled bitterly. He was about to be crushed by his own arrogance. I copied everything, saved it in hidden folders. I closed the laptop and fixed it as it was. He would never have imagined that the sentence had already been written. I walked through the house calmly, each step more steady. The confrontation was closer than ever, and I was ready to burn all the bridges. That night, I dreamed of the final scene. I saw shocked faces, heard heavy silences, felt his fall echo like thunder. I woke up sweaty, but with a smile on my face. It was just a dream, but also a foreshadowing. The reality would soon be even more intense. At breakfast, I noticed him trying to get closer. He spoke of romantic dinners, of new beginnings. It was pathetic theater, a desperate act. I watched calmly, and his every word was a noose tightening around his own neck. He didn't know it, but he was already heading towards the abyss. As he left, my cell phone rang again. It was the same feminine voice, firm and determined. "He's going to be at an event today. Bring your evidence. It's time to end it all." I felt my skin crawl. Fate was handing me the perfect chance, and I wouldn't hesitate. I calmly packed my bag. I kept the folders, the pen drive, the printed copies. I looked in the mirror and saw a different woman. Eyes steady, shoulders raised, breathing controlled. I was no longer a prisoner. I was a judge, and the final hearing was scheduled. I drove to the indicated address, heart on fire. Every kilometer was a step towards the end. I remembered the sleepless nights, the swallowed cries, the silent humiliations. All of that was now fuel. There was no turning back. The reveal scene was about to happen. When I parked the car, I took a deep breath. The building in front of me lit up like a ready stage. I knew that when I walked through those doors, my life would change forever. The silence of the car hugged me for a moment, like goodbye. And then, with firm steps, I headed towards the inevitable. And little did I know that inside that room, not only would he fall, even bigger secrets were waiting for me. Hidden truths that would turn my world upside down. The fall would not be his alone. It would be an earthquake that would swallow us all. The hall was lit with heavy chandeliers, an atmosphere of apparent elegance. Decorated tables, forced laughter, clinking glasses. I walked with steady steps, each click of my heels echoing like a warning. He carried in his bag not just evidence, but the weight of years of lies. The racing heart was fuel, not weakness. He was there, surrounded by colleagues wearing his best suit. He smiled, gestured, sold the image of an exemplary man. When our eyes met, for a second I saw surprise. Maybe it was because of my cold gaze, maybe because of the silence in my posture. I was no longer a wife, I was a living accusation. I sat at a nearby table watching the performance. He pretended to be calm, but his fingers tapped nervously on the glass. Every gesture betrayed his hidden fear. I let time pass, like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to attack. There was no rush, just precision. As the speeches followed one another, my mind recalled each test. The perfume on the coats, the messages, the motel receipts, the videos of the lover. Everything was with me, ready to explode. I no longer needed to question. I had the naked truth. And the truth weighs more than any excuse. I got up slowly and walked to the center of the room. The buzz gradually stopped, eyes turned to me. I placed my bag on the main table, took out the papers, photos, and recorded audio. Each click echoed like a gunshot. Silence became a stage. He tried to smile, but his face lost color. He got up, muttered something inaudible, and took a step towards me. I held up a photo between my fingers and showed it to everyone. It was the kiss in the parking lot, the hug that left no doubt. The entire hall held its breath. Voices began to whisper. Looks shifted. He stammered, tried to justify it, but there was no denying it. The images were clear, the dates exact, the records perfect. Every attempted defense sounded pathetic. And I watched in silence, firm, like an implacable judge. The mistress was there, hidden among guests. When she realized that she would also be exposed, she stood still, eyes wide. The blush on his face was a silent confession. I looked at her with contempt, but without needing words. Shame was already doing the work for me. He came closer, whispering my name, trying to calm me down. But I interrupted him firmly, my voice loud, clear. You said I was paranoid. The words echoed through the hall like a sentence. The impact was immediate. A murmur of astonishment ran through the room. There, the lie died. My sister appeared at my side, silent support. He held my hand, and I felt strength run through my veins. I was no longer alone. That fall wasn't just my victory, it was the victory of every woman who has ever been silenced. And that thought gave me even more power. He tried to leave, but hands held him back. Colleagues, friends, even superiors. No one wanted to be complicit in silence. The respected man crumbled in front of everyone. That expensive suit no longer hid the skeleton of lies. His mask broke into shards, visible to everyone. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just let the evidence speak for me. Photos, messages, videos, audios. An arsenal of truths that didn't need subtitles. The hall watched, shocked, unable to look away. He was naked, stripped of credibility. At the height of the silence, I looked up and said, "Intuition never fails." My words weren't just for him. They were for every female gaze that watched me. I felt a lump in my throat dissolve. It wasn't just revenge. It was liberation. My voice carried all the silent voices. He fell into his chair, defeated, face in his hands. The arrogant, confident, impenetrable man now seemed small. His breathing was shallow, his body hunched over. The audience looked on with a mixture of disgust and pity. But I didn't feel sorry. I felt justice. The lover left in a hurry, tripping over her own heels. No one stopped her, but everyone watched her with contempt. The scandal was already done. The secret no longer existed. She would be remembered as an accomplice to the lie. And he, like the man who destroyed his own house. My sister squeezed my hand and whispered, "You win." But inside me, I knew it wasn't just victory. It was a painful rebirth made of ashes and tears. There would still be nights of crying. There would still be marks. But nothing would erase the fact. I had won. When the silence dissipated, some came to me. Words of support, looks of admiration, discreet hugs. I felt like I wasn't just telling my story. I was holding up a mirror to so many others, and every comment was a reminder that I was no exception. I left the room with my head held high. The night air hit me like a breath of freedom. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and felt the weight of victory. There were no more chains, no more blame. Just the open road for a new path. I drove back home in silence, but with a firm heart. I knew that from then on, nothing would be the same. The evidence was exposed, the truth revealed. He could no longer trap me in his web. I was free, even if I was hurt. Upon arrival, I entered the house and looked around. Each object looked different, as if betrayal had marked everything. But there was also something new in the air. Lightness. The future was still uncertain, but it was no longer a prison. For the first time in a long time, I breathed. And it is in this breath that I leave the question that echoes. How many women will still ignore the signs? How many will continue to believe it's paranoia when it's just intuition screaming? And if it were you, what would you do in the face of the truth? The choice is never easy, but silence always takes a toll.